Thanks everyone for joining the Health Check Diagnostic webinar. Certainly, as Jared said, if there are questions, do ask them in the chat window, and Jared will again moderate those questions as we get towards the end. Our focus really this afternoon, from an introductory perspective, who is Intricity? We're a company that help organizations simplify complexity. And we do focus on information management primarily. So clearly you'll see data governance, and we do a lot of work with organizations of different sizes on how to manage their data governance practice. Data warehousing certainly is an important component of our work, and much of that spans into big data and areas that go beyond traditional sort of warehousing. And ultimately, it's all about analytics. It's all about operational and predictive analytics and planning. And so we've done a lot of work in this area. But all of this has to do with data. We are an Informatica Channel Partner of the Year. The reason for the 2 awards is we're a multi-year award winner. And we'll reference our YouTube channel in a minute. There's a lot of really good content that we would welcome you to take a look at and provide us some feedback. I apologize for this busy eye chart, but this is a partial list of customers we worked with over the years. And certainly, as you can see, information is ubiquitous, and it does live in a variety of industries. Intricity is headquartered in New York, and we have 12 locations across the U.S. As these customers can certainly attest, they're all across the U.S., and some are a little bit outside of the U.S. as well. And so we cover certainly the manufacturing sector, financial services, retail, insurance, pharma, and so on. As I said earlier, the YouTube channel now has dozens of videos that have been published and over 1 million views. Certainly videos that are non-technology focused, but they do focus on data. And many of these have been used in executive presentations. They've been used in a number of different settings. And certainly, if you Google Intricity 101 on YouTube, or just type in the URL, you'll see in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a listing of the videos. And again, feedback is certainly appreciated. As I said, they're not product specific, but they do focus on challenges that many of our customers face. One of those challenges certainly has to do with infrastructure as it relates to a large deployment. And so the focus of this conversation is around Informatica and around ETL practices, but certainly our health checks reach beyond just the ETL side of the equation. But one of the big challenges we see with organizations is many are focused on getting things up and running and sort of keeping the lights on. And what am I going to do for the next week? What am I going to do for the next 4 weeks? And ultimately, it's about these 3-month cycles. What do we do around cloud? What do we do around data quality? What do we do around B2B? What do we do around master data management? And again, all of this is sort of focused on keeping the lights on, keeping the fires away, and not necessarily being very strategic. And so a health check is a moment to pause, and it's also a moment to much like, so the parallels that we see with this offering is it's much like we as human beings go to our physicians for an annual health check. Very similar here. It's an information management health check. So what are we doing as internally within the organization, and how do we compare to others and experiences that Intricity has had across a number of different industries, a number of different environments and customers? And so the key question is, as we move on from the area of keeping the lights on, what could we do? What can we be doing better? What are our opportunities? What are some of the things that we can focus on tactically, but also focus on strategically? And that's what this engagement is about. How do we stop putting the fires out? How do we stop seeing the forest instead of seeing the trees? And so again, for us, it's how can we be more better aligned, and what things can we do, and how do we make this actionable? And that's exactly what this offering is about. And so what Intricity does is bring best practices and a bottom-up and a top-down approach of looking at data management and looking at the health of our data management system. Typically, in the firefighting mode, we're looking at performance. So, for example, a job used to take 2 hours to run. Now we can't finish that job in 8 hours. What's going on? Why do we have such an issue? Or we're looking to move from batch and we want to do real time. Or we're looking to do predictive, but our data doesn't support predictive analytics. We have operational needs. We have analytical needs. What can we do as an organization to move to what we would like to be a more of an organizational best practice? And that's exactly what the health check is all about. If you look at it, what we do is, instead of this being much like, again, a physician's office, there is a process. There's a well-defined process from looking at a system and being able to use the logs that our Informatica environment collects. Use those logs, upload those logs to a cloud so we can run some of the initial diagnostics on the system. As we move this in week 1, so this is a 3-week, as you could see, process, we assess the current architecture, look at the landscape, what policies have been applied to each of the mappings, and how are they being executed in practice. What does our Informatica environment look like? The second piece that we do in week 2 is we really do an assessment of the results that we found. So we look at the data. We're looking at the data. We're not sort of coming in and doing a consulting engagement, maybe looking at 1 or 2 mappings. We're looking at the entire system, which is very different than what these engagements for us used to look like. So unlike the past, we have surgical precision. We have equipment that's available to us. We have instrumentation available to us to provide precise analysis and diagnostic work around our Informatica environments, whether it's a single node or a multi-node deployment. And in week 3, we actually present an executive summary and an actionable plan. What do we need to do tactically? What are the steps that we need to follow from a tactical perspective? And more importantly, what are our strategic opportunities? What do we need to do so that our environment moves forward and is healthy and is there to support the business? So this 3-week Intricity Health Check is really focused on data flows from, obviously, sources and wherever Informatica brings that data. But we look holistically across the system to see how these jobs interoperate with one another, how they interact with one another. And on the next few slides, you'll see some examples of the insight that we're able to gain from the diagnostic testing. Again, carrying the health analogy forward, we're doing an EKG, we're doing an MRI of your environment to be able to understand where our opportunities are, where our bottlenecks are, and certainly providing a plan of how we can manage through those challenges. One of the keys you see here, so this is an example screenshot. So one of the things that we deliver is we can look at multiple environments. And here we're looking sort of at all statistics. We're looking at environments. We're looking at how much time a particular job took to run. So this is a high-level ETL statistic. And as you can see here, run times and space consumptions. We look at indexes. We look at a number of different things. How many rows per second were executed, what's the size of our indexes, and so on. The other thing that you'll see in the lower left-hand corner is a comparison of multiple runs. So we can see that some runs took longer and some runs took shorter, and we can see some changes in our environment that might have taken place. And of course, the last in the lower right-hand corner, we see the changes, if any, to our database and database space. So again, this is a holistic view in one screenshot of the entire environment and comparing runs across multiple days of how the jobs have run. So here you'll see multiple days from 28th to the 29th, and then ultimately to the 30th. As we drill into this, we get further visibility. And so here we essentially have a Gantt chart, and we're able to look at this Gantt chart to see visually what are the run times of each of the independent jobs. And we can magnify a section of this chart to sort of look at specific sections and filter by folders, by task type, by runtime, and the time frame of when this job was run. But what's also interesting is we're able to then drill down into the task details and look at the threads, look at the transformations, even look at the SQL and of course database statistics for each of the runs that were executed. Here is another example of sort of a good versus bad Gantt chart. So you can clearly see the Gantt on the top has a nice number of concurrency. We've got multiple jobs running. They're sort of sharing their processing space versus a much more linear approach that you see on the Gantt chart on the bottom. So again, high-level look at this already tells us a lot about the way that the jobs are designed. And many times it's not necessarily a design change. Sometimes it's just a configuration change that's required. But we now have, as I said, instrumentation. We're able to look at the environment, and without spending weeks and weeks of trying to look at each individual mapping, we're getting a holistic view across thousands of mappings potentially. This is another example of ETL concurrency. So we're looking at the concurrency tab of this diagnostic tool set. And here we see concurrency peaks. So sort of in the middle you have on 411 a big peak, and then the rest of it sort of is well below normal thresholds. We'd like to see things that are a little bit more homogenized, like you see on the bottom. The bottom chart certainly has some peaks, but if you look, we've got opportunities across the space where we've got jobs that are running concurrently, and as we magnify, we're looking at this section on the bottom that's been magnified, and we're looking at it on the top. You can clearly see that there was something that took place in the morning of 411 that might require further analysis. Again, another example. This one is a prime example of something that's good and something that's bad. So you could clearly see on the bottom there's very little activity except for a single spike that happens at 6:45 p.m. And again, not a lot of concurrency, not a lot of work that's going on that's leveraging the environment properly. And versus the session that's taking place on the top, that's a much healthier environment. And certainly we see jobs drop off towards the morning, perhaps the jobs are completed. And so again, a very interesting view directly into our environment. And obviously we can filter and specify certain types of jobs, whether it be batch, whether it be real-time or incremental or full-time loads. So again, a lot of ability in terms of picking out just the jobs that we might be interested in. Another good example is our bottleneck view. So here we sort of specified a filter, and we said we want those bottlenecks that are sort of more than 5 minutes, those jobs that are running more than 5 minutes, and don't have really good concurrency. So maybe there's 2 or less jobs that are running. And so we filtered down. We might have had thousands of jobs, but this gives us a short list of opportunities that we can focus on. Again, surgical precision without having to manually run each job, gather the manual run statistics. We're able to look at the system holistically and get a really good view in terms of where our opportunities are. And so here we're able to drill into a particular task to see what are the threads that are running and how many transformations, and again, look down to the SQL that's being executed to provide really smart analytics in terms of, is this really an opportunity for us to tweak and change? So again, another view of our diagnostic session, and in this particular case, you could see the subject area that's being affected. You could see the name of the session that's running, and of course, those are we can take only those jobs that have failed, only those jobs that have succeeded, and as you can see here, those are all sortable columns. So, for example, if we wanted to look at only those we're looking, for example, at reads or writes per second. So here on the right, you see some interesting jobs where we've got reads almost equal or exactly equal to the number of writes, and then we've got jobs that have a much different proportion. But you can clearly see here, everything has succeeded, but we've got some jobs that ultimately wrote out very little, and those jobs that wrote out millions of rows. Here again, we're drilling into a particular session. So we've got a session that ran. So we clicked on it. We've gotten multiple samples. So as you can see in the upper left-hand corner, it's what's nice with this tool set also is for many customers we end up doing a baseline. They'll record a baseline of their particular run, and then they can do comparisons against baseline to see if something has changed. Very powerful, especially because as our environments get changed, maybe version upgrades take place. Very, very important having the ability to baseline the jobs, not at the top level. So, for example, if you know that a job takes 4 hours to run, that's not enough information because you don't have anything that's actionable. Here we know what the 4 hours are made up of. What are the specific things that are happening in our Informatica environment that's taking 4 hours? And so if there's a change, we are able to look at it at the atomic level. We're able to look at each individual transformation or a lookup and understand exactly what's going on. So here we see the sources and what we've done on the reader side of things. We see the targets, and then ultimately we see the correlation between our reader, our transfer, and our writer processes within Informatica. And as you can clearly see here, we've got different run times and different idle times between them. So here, if you look on the far right in the busy percentage, this would not be necessarily a good situation. So here we've got 77% busy on reading and very little on writing. So it's potentially an imbalanced job. Furthermore, as I indicated earlier, we have the ability to drill down directly into the SQL and understand what's happening in the SQL. So instead of waiting or using multiple tools to go back and forth with the DBAs to sort of understand how our SQL is being translated and what's happening with that SQL, we're able to look at the plan, and we're able to look at the dictionary of the objects that, in this example, an Oracle environment, but we're able to look down to the objects and actually see some statistics directly from the execute plan. So again, more actionable information, more diagnostic information to make better recommendations and smarter decisions. And here is another example of comparisons. So here we're looking sort of where two ETL runs have run. So for example, we see here the first time this particular session was run, it took 3 hours and 9 minutes to run. We ran it a second time, and it took 3 minutes to run. So obviously something strange is going on with this environment. Maybe there's an upgrade taking place. Maybe there was a large BI job being executed. But again, the ability to compare, and we obviously can compare multiple times against one another. So this is an example of a baseline. Baseline maybe is time 2, and then we've got a strange change that took place, and we've got an environment that's now running dramatically slower. Maybe it's, people might say it's the number of records, and so here we're also doing a comparison between the number of records in each of the individual runs. And so you can clearly see here the change is very, very small, while the impact to the timing is quite dramatic. Again, more tools that are available to us to make better recommendations. As we look at this, the other important thing we can do is we can run SQL statistics. So you can see some of the things that are available to us here. We can look at indexes, table spaces, and here is an example of SQL statistics. So we can see how much time a particular statement that's part of our job took to run and what it looks like. certainly, again, very powerful because we're able to make better decisions with data that's being that the system is recording. But because the logs on Informatica are so large and they're flat files and they're difficult to filter and index, instead of doing this manually again, or instead of doing this on a job-by-job basis, we now have the tools at our disposal to be able to do this holistically across the entire environment. So here is another example. Sort of, we can do a search and see where a particular field, for example, is being used in a mapping. And so here we can look at our system. This is an incredibly useful tool if you're doing an audit of your system, or if you need to do some things that allow you to look across multiple mappings, or if you've determined that you've got a conversion formula that's incorrect and you want to know where you're using it. This is a phenomenal way of doing that. So you could say, I want to search across all my entities and look for cases where I have this sort of a condition that exists. And this allows us to type in a query, search across the entire Informatica mappings, across the entire environment, and then come back to us and tell us which sessions make use of those particular fields or those particular formulas. So here is something where we're looking at configuration, and again, a lot of things that we see with Informatica environments have to do with sizing and also with configuration. A lot of times the system was installed either default or the parameters weren't clear, and so we have an incongruency between what is optimal and what's configured currently in the system. And so here you can see, for example, that we have excessive parallelism turned on. We have 16 CPUs, and again, a lot of confusion in the marketplace with administrators of Informatica environments in terms of how do you properly scale your environment, number of CPUs versus number of maximum parallel servers. And so just tweaking those variables properly a lot of times gives you a much better, much more stable system and a much better system that runs. And so we can see from a setting perspective, we have something that's out of whack. We've got 16 CPUs and we've got 500 parallel servers that have been set up. So this is another good example of heavy lookups. So as many of you know, lookups are a challenge for any large environment, and the way those lookups get executed is many times challenging. So what is interesting here is we're able to find lookups that perhaps are not being used efficiently. So for example, here, as you can see in the transfer, we've got 95% busy. Why? And you can see the breakdown percentage of the lookups. They're taking a big chunk of the processing time and doing 9 million, 3 million row lookups. And sometimes we've seen environments where those lookups are reused again and again and again. And so again, great opportunities with surgical precision to be able to make recommendations that are not only actionable, but by making these small tuning changes, you can have a much more scalable, much more reliable environment. Because again, the more we're hitting the database, the more stress we're putting on our system, the more challenging it becomes. And so again, data tells us an important story here, and we're able to make really good decisions based on that data. Here is an example of a plan, and so we're looking sort of at a source qualifier that has a join condition that's always true, so not necessarily the best execution plan. And so we're seeing nested loops that result from an ineffective index strategy. So again, tuning, but tuning with visual access to the data is very, very important. And so this provides us access to that kind of information. ultimately, this is about how do we make better use of our infrastructure and better use of our current architecture. Do we need to make changes in our environment? Are there better opportunities in scaling our existing environment? Do we have an underperforming environment because it's not scaled properly? And so we might have multiple systems from which we read data. We might have multiple internal data systems that come across. And if you have a data warehouse and then a business intelligence layer, what's the optimal way? What's the current state versus future state? And so what we help our customers do as part of the health check is to step through and figure out what needs to happen, for example, strategically in the next 3 months. What needs to happen in the next 6 months, and what other things need to come into play? If it's data governance, if it's data stewardship, what do we do with data quality? And ultimately, what changes do we need to make to our environment? And again, this is a sample. Every customer is of course, unique. And then what do we do long term? What's our 12-month strategic plan? How do we bring environments in line and have a well-performing enterprise architecture? And so an example, many customers ask us, so what's the end result of this? You come in, you do all of this work, you have phenomenal tools that are available to you to now do with surgical precision, as you say, access into our environment. What does it look like? What do the deliverables look like? And these are a couple of pages off of a health check assessment. And obviously you could see we're referencing screenshots from the environment and the analysis that we've done so that it has empirical evidence behind our suggestions. These are the findings and these are the recommendations. And as you can see in this particular example, it also focused on as-is versus to-be architecture in terms of how the data pipelines would work. And so again, the call to action, and Jared certainly can fill in the gaps here, but we run the health check accelerator on your environment. Essentially, there's no data that leaves your environment other than essentially log files, but there's no customer data, obviously, no proprietary data. We look and we conduct an assessment of the current architecture, and we work with you on that. We run through the accelerator, and we see through the dashboard where opportunities are to make changes in your environment, and ultimately present our findings and an action plan in week 3. And the typical cost for this engagement, of course, it might vary, but we sort of looked at what's the average cost of conducting this kind of a health check, and it's approximately $40,000 to run that through. And if there are questions, we're happy to answer questions. And these are our contact details as well if anyone wants to follow up after the webinar.
Thanks, Arkady. So a couple questions. One is around, and I can answer this one. It's regarding the analytics themselves. Can the analytics be continued over time? And the answer is yes. We can continue to run the analytics beyond just the initial health check engagement. It's all based on the number of processors that you have and whatnot. So that's a conversation we can definitely have with you and your teams, so that we can price it right for your environment. But again, the engagement itself is intended to address both the tactical and strategic plans. What you need to address within the next few weeks, and then over the long run, over 3 months to a year. I don't see any additional questions coming through. We'll hang on the line for just a few more seconds here, and if I see a question pop through, then we'll follow up with that. And then, if not, if you'll see my email address down below on the bottom right, I'm Jared Hillam. It's jhillam@intricity.com. Send me your questions if you want to do